Also today, RAF jets swooped in to intercept two Russian long-range maritime patrol bombers. I appreciate that was a long title. But they were travelling north of the Shetland Islands in Scotland earlier today. The Ministry of Defence told us this. And at least 11 people have been killed following reports of infighting between Chechen fighters loyal to the Kremlin and Russian soldiers. Does that signal some sort of instability within Putin's ranks? Let's try and get to the bottom of both of these stories. Alan Mendoza, director of the Henry Jackson Society, joins me on the line this evening. Alan, good evening.
Good evening.
Look, it was a bit of a puzzle this morning. We get this story that the RAF jets have swooped in for this interception, and then what we're sort of led to believe is that intercepting a Russian patrol bomber is not actually that unusual.
Yes, I'm afraid it's quite a normal occurrence as opposed to what you might think. And we've had lots of examples over the past few years, both in the air and also, don't forget, submarines as well, sort of trying to track and beneath the sea surface. So the Russians tend to try and come as close as they can to try and just test our defences and provoke. It's not just us, it's other countries as well. And what we have to do is obviously scramble quickly to do rapid reaction just to escort them out of the territory, basically. Of course, it does run the risk that an accident might occur.
Yeah, and that would be a very significant risk, clearly. Something happened in Denmark just earlier. Is there sort of any increase in the instance this is happening?
Yeah, well, I think the Russians are obviously trying to get back at all those who they feel are sort of allying against them. But they've been doing it for many years. This happened well before the Ukraine war started. And it's an example of, sort of Russia's flexing of its military muscle. That said, we've seen its military muscle is much weaker than it would like us to believe in Ukraine. So I'm not sure the Russians are doing themselves any favours by these sort of macho tactics.
So I know you don't work for the MOD, but just what's your theory then of why we learned about this happening today? Why have they told us?
Well, I think they want us to know, frankly, that the Russians are trying tricks on the UK. Now, we know the Russians are attempting all kinds of operations. This is one element, the military side, when they're reminding us of their presence there. We also, of course, know about their influence operations, their social media operations. What I think the MOD is trying to remind us is that the Russians remain an ever-present threat to the UK in a variety of different theatres.
Sort of a lot of raised eyebrows this morning when people first learnt of the story. The final thing I want to talk about is we know there's been this infighting between Chechen fighters, those loyal to the Kremlin, and Russian soldiers. What do you think is at the heart of this?
Well, I think there's a constant sort of battle within the Russian various arms of the military, if you like. It looks like they're comprised of, as you say, different sort of battalions, as it were, from different places. And a lot of them are jostling, as the Wagner group was, to suggest that the Russian military is not running the war very well. And I think if you're, a Chechen fighter who's been summoned in to help the Russians, and you might be rather frustrated by the progress of the war, and you might want to do it better, just like it seemed Wagner wanted to try to do the same thing. It doesn't give much confidence in Russian command and control, though, that they keep on having these issues.
No, and then we find out about them. How much, is it too far a step to say, look, there's significant instability within Putin's ranks?
Well, I think there is. We had that coup attempt, or whatever you want to call it, from the Wagner group that got, of course, surprisingly far down the path. And it was commented at the time that Wagner was not the only, if you like, paramilitary group or other force commanded by people. And it's interesting that Mr. Kadyrov, the Chechen leader, is the other big warlord, if you like, who controls, a vast number of fighters that are helping the Russians. So it perhaps is not a surprise, actually, that this is occurring again. And it shows that Mr. Putin's control is fraying at the edges and may collapse quite quickly.